pleasure to welcome you all here to the West Lafayette Public Library. My name is Melissa. I'm the children's librarian with a very special opportunity to be with the adults in the room. So I want to thank you so much for coming here. It's an exciting time to be alive in Indiana, and I know we're all looking forward to April 8th for the big event. I want to say to all of those who are watching live, thank you for joining us. If you are at another library watching this because you don't have the optimal location right next to Purdue University, we're glad that you can also share the wisdom of our guest speaker. For those of you who have small ones in your lives, I'd like you to know that we have an event on Friday at 5 p.m. down in the Children's Activity Room, and we'll be talking about the eclipse with our friends and doing some crafts and other educational things together. So that's a second opportunity to celebrate the eclipse. I want to thank Dr. Barrett Caldwell for being generous with his time, his eclipse glasses, his NASA-created eclipse books for the visually impaired. You can explore each of them. They're the same book. I've got it on each table, so I invite you to explore. At the end of the program, I will be giving out glasses, one per attendee. And with that, I want to especially thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Dr. Barrett Caldwell is here. He's an industrial engineer, as well as many other accolades and credentials. So thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming.
So I want to thank Melissa for giving me this opportunity to have this presentation with a live audience as well as an audience online and a recorded audience, because it's much easier than driving around to 92 different counties and making presentations all in the next 32 days, 20 hours, and 40 minutes or so. So that's how much time until the eclipse starts. Yes, I'm counting. So, and for those of you who are looking at this screen and you're thinking, well, that's very beautiful, but what does it have to do with an eclipse? It really doesn't have anything to do with an eclipse. It is in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, near where I grew up. I decided to give you a slightly more interesting and personally relevant desktop picture. Now I can get it out of there. These gentlemen are responsible for my career. So this is the crew of Apollo 8. And a few years ago they did a 50th anniversary of their mission, which is actually Christmas Eve 1968, when I decided I wanted to do NASA for a life. And here I am, and I don't know if they have any idea that they had that level of impact on me, but I'm definitely grateful that they did. So we are going to spend a little bit of time. I promised Melissa that I would not give a standard 75-minute or 100-minute lecture. It's probably closer to 30. Maybe a little bit less, unless you stop me and ask for questions. By the way, please stop me and ask for questions. Okay. I like signs of life, and I like engaged audiences. So let's see what we can do about this. That works. Okay. So waiting for the shadow. A little bit of background about me that I've already started on. I'm director of the NASA Indiana Space Grant Consortium. This is actually a program from the NASA Office of STEM Engagement. I'll explain that in just a moment. I've been Space Grant Director for 22 years. I find that hard to believe. I've been at Purdue since 2000. Before that, I was a faculty member at one of those red and white schools, not the Crimson and Cream School being represented, University of Wisconsin-Madison. And before that, I did my graduate work at the University of California, Davis, go Aggies, in psychology after doing degrees in aeronautics and astronautics and humanities at MIT. So I was a systems engineer with a subsystem focus on human teams. So what is Space Grant? So the National Space Grant College and Fellowship Program used to be in what's called we are in what used to be called the NASA Office of Education. But as a government office, we have to reorg and rename ourselves every once in a while. We're the Office of STEM Engagement. And this is a national network of colleges, universities, science outreach centers, companies, etc. There are about 1,000 space grant affiliates in the country. We've got about 26 right now in Indiana, between a little over a dozen universities, as well as science centers and those children's museums that you love to go to. There are consortia in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and we've got baby consortia growing up in Guam and the Virgin Islands. And our mission is to foster and enhance what we'll call STEM ecosystems and foster careers in aerospace science and technology. Really, our goal is to inspire, engage, educate, and employ the next generation of explorers. That's why our Space Grant logo for Indiana has those 4 words: inspire, educate, engage, educate, and employ. And we're supposed to strengthen the public understanding by enabling powerful connections to NASA's mission and work. Hence why I'm here tonight. Let's talk about episode 3 of the Great American Eclipse. So actually, this is a really good start. We have been very, very lucky in this part of the country that we've had 3 eclipses in just the past few years. So did any of you attend or drive to or wander to the Path of Totality for the eclipse in 2017? So a couple of you did, and you understand why I'm so excited. The experience of totality is unlike anything else that I've ever experienced, and I'll explain sort of why in a little bit. I was in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, which is normally about 45 minutes from Evansville, but on our way back it took about 4.5 hours. We'll talk about that. Episode 2 was an annular eclipse on Saturday, October 14th, 2023. The path of annularity was in the southwest U.S. I got to go to Albuquerque to experience the annular eclipse. Although you could see a partial eclipse here in Indiana, we actually thought of that as great practice for safe viewing. And the capstone for all of that is the total solar eclipse on Monday, April 8th. This will be visible within the path of totality, reside about 60% of the population of Indiana. So it goes, the path of totality includes cities of Evansville, Bloomington, Indianapolis, Muncie, and tiny little towns that you may not be thinking about. Jasper's not so small. Winchester is very small. So we've been working with all of those things. I have lots of different pictures that I can show you in various levels of detail. I try to credit them when I can. This is actually material from the Evansville Museum. So again, episode 1, the experience and the impact really is total. And yeah.
I was wondering if you could raise the microphone.
Oh, raise the microphone.
I'm not going to turn that on. The volume.
Oh.
Just
1 second.
Hey, let's turn it on. That's even better. Is that better?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So one of the challenges that I've had with people in the state, that if you haven't experienced a total eclipse, what's the deal? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Ooh. On and volume, yes. But I will say, when I was in Kentucky, the people standing next to me were from Switzerland. So people come from all over the world to follow and engage in eclipses. It is a completely different experience during totality. So if you experience partial eclipse, you notice that the sky looks a little funny, the lighting looks a little bit different. This is actually a picture I took during totality. So it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it looks like sunset in all directions. So basically the light of this that you get from the sun in the middle of the day is basically equivalent to the full moon. It has an effect on temperature during the path of totality. The area in the shadow really does cool down a little bit. It has wind effects because of those temperature effects. And basically, there's cultural and religious impacts that we see back hundreds, if not thousands of years from cultures all over the world, how they experience, how they tell the story of the eclipse, and what do they do with that. My first message, of course, and this is why the glasses are here, safety is crucial and education is vital for that. There is a significant risk of blindness because, we got told by parents and other elders, don't stare at the sun, you'll go blind. Well, that's actually true, and that's especially true during an eclipse because the level of light seems lower, but it is still enough to cause significant retinal damage. And the additional problem is we don't have nerve endings in that part of the eye. So by the time you notice that there's a problem, you're going to see that there's a problem. You're not going to feel a sunburn or anything like that. But it's a really significant issue that we don't have the medical technology to repair. So the one thing that you can do, everyone should be wearing glasses if they're looking at the sun during any period of partial eclipse. If you are fortunate enough to be within the path of totality, that's the time to take the glasses off. And I can talk a little bit more about that. The economic and social impacts can be really significant, both in good ways and bad ways. So the state of Wyoming received about $61 million in out-of-state tourist impact for a state that has fewer people than the city of Indianapolis. So that was a very big deal for them. Hopkinsville called itself Eclipseville, and they had a NASA location of emphasis. They saw maybe about 100,000 visitors on that day. That's all great. The biggest negative is always traffic. So these are some signs from, the top picture is actually people trying to leave after the eclipse from Wyoming. Those were signs that were on the highways in Oregon, in Wyoming during the eclipse. Solar eclipse Monday, delays possible. No parking on highway for solar eclipse, please don't do that. And the bottom one is a picture of the scene in Bend, Oregon. You can actually look at a national map of traffic delays for that day, and the greatest traffic delays in the United States perfectly follow the path of totality. Episode 2. I was strongly convinced to go to Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta. Great visibility, but it was cold because it's the mountains in October. It was about 25 degrees when we started, about 45 or 50 degrees by eclipse time at about 10:30 in the morning. Oh, and it was really, really good. And it was the kickoff of what NASA calls the sun's big year. Actually, the NASA people call it the heliophysics big year, but I'm not sure that goes over as well with general public audiences. Again, it was great. The Heliophysics Education Activation Team, or HEAT, did videos and interviews at the eclipse. They actually had a tent about this size at the Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta grounds, and there were a lot of people there. Again, biggest negative, local traffic stops, visitors pulling over, trying to get an Uber to the Balloon Fiesta grounds, that was a challenge. So, yeah. Okay. What are the lessons that we learned? Managing a big event is just a different level of event planning. There are lots of different levels of awareness. I've got people in this audience of all ages with different levels of experience, and different levels of science literacy, and trying to talk to all of them at the same time is really, really an interesting challenge. The other thing is that what happens when you're at a balloon fiesta and the balloons can't fly? The only thing to do is go to the NASA booth. So we actually got to see what would happen when our engagement was overloaded by 50, 60,000 people who had nothing better to do, which is a really great lesson for our experience, say, at the Motor Speedway or down by White River State Park or something like that. One of the reasons why I like these pictures, the top picture seems blurry, but that is a colander image of the partial phase of the eclipse to show that you can actually use a number of different objects for safe eclipse viewing. Colanders are really, really good. Pinholes through paper and showing them. You can actually see the shadow of the moon across the sun when you're looking through leaves of trees. It's very, very cool. We probably won't have that many leaves in April, but it's a really cool effect. So some people may be asking, is this really a NASA thing? Is this really that important? As I said, this is part of the Heliophysics Big Year celebration by NASA. The picture that I'm showing here is Nikki Fox. She is the Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate at NASA, and she wanted to talk so much about the Parker Space Probe and all of NASA's maybe 150 or so current and planned Science Mission Directorate missions, and a lot of it starts with the study of heliophysics. Dr. Fox actually is a heliophysicist. And one of the things that's really interesting for people who study the sun, we are approaching a period called solar max, where the sun's activity cycle and the behavior of the corona is much more active than it was during this 2017 eclipse. And this is like an ideal time to study the behavior of the sun when you can actually see the corona. And so if you look at all these missions, it starts with the Heliophysics Big Year and the ability to study the corona. So, what's the fuss? Well, I've already told you what the fuss is in general, but what's the fuss for Indiana? Why do we have eclipses at all? Alternatively, why don't we have eclipses every month? Okay. And is there really a difference? And I'm going to try to spend a little bit of time on all of these. Because actually, these are all great questions to start asking really interesting things about the organization of the solar system. So why do we have eclipses at all? Well, because the Earth has a moon, and the moon is pretty big. Well, it's only kind of big. We think of it as big because it's something that we can see easily, as opposed to any of the other planets, which are just dots, okay? So when you think about the moon, and on the left-hand side of this, it's basically eclipse safety and showing how to use a pinhole camera. We have eclipses sort of on average every couple of years. But any single spot on the planet Earth may only experience a total eclipse every 375 years or so. So we got really, really lucky for the past 6 years, and it'll be a long time, like dozens of years, before there are additional eclipses where totality is visible in Indiana. If you include the really far northern corner of northern Indiana, there may be an eclipse in 2099. Otherwise, it's not to the end of the 22nd century. And they come in pairs, and I'll explain why in a bit. And so the idea of an eclipse, quite simply, is one object gets in front of the other object, so that if you're on that second object and you're looking at the sun, the first object gets in the way. Okay? So we talk about solar eclipses when the moon gets in the way of the sun, and lunar eclipses, which are actually the Earth getting in the way of the moon. And so they tend to come in pairs because of how we, let me go to the next slide. Why we don't have eclipses every month is that the Earth is tilted in its orientation to the sun. That's why we have seasons. The moon is tilted in its orbit around the Earth. So when you add those tilts together, and they're not completely aligned with each other, you don't have the moon rising and falling in the sky at the same rate that the sun rises and falls in the sky, from our perspective. So that the moon doesn't align with the shadow, with the sun. So we don't have the opportunity every month for the moon to pass in front of our view of the sun. So we don't get the shadow of the moon hiding the sun every month. It only happens when those orbital angles are aligned. And it's really complex orbital mechanics that I promised that I would not go into after 5 o'clock. Okay? But when they do align, we get solar-lunar eclipse pairs. And they're not necessarily visible in the same places. So I actually haven't checked, but I don't think that the lunar eclipse that goes with this solar eclipse is easily visible from this part of the world. Next up. What's the difference? Now, I hear people talk about, well, we're partial totality or mostly totality. No, this is kind of a pass-fail example. Either you're total or you're not. And that sounds kind of harsh, but really, it's because of that alignment of the angles of the sun and moon that make the difference between if you just get a bite taken out of the sun or if the sun goes away. And that's really the difference between partial and total eclipse. So if you think about the continental U.S., actually that's the lower 48 is basically in the bottom image. The lower 48, the contiguous United States, is about the diameter of the moon. Okay, that's the other reason why totality is kind of a narrow path, because the moon's not that big. Okay, but everybody in that sort of contiguous U.S. gets to experience a partial eclipse. But the path of totality is really only about 150 miles wide. And when you look at how much of the sun is blocked by the moon, the greatest obscuration or blockage of the sun during the annularity, and Albuquerque was almost dead center of the center line of annularity, it was less blockage of the sun than Lafayette will experience during the total eclipse, and we're still going to be a partial eclipse. So and that's still too bright to look at the sun without eclipse viewers or some other viewing capability. So why was it annular? Why wasn't it total? Well, remember the orbits discussion? The moon's orbit is not just not at the right angle all the time. The moon's orbit isn't completely circular. So it's further away from us sometimes and closer to us sometimes. And the same way that you can do this, and like, okay, I want to make that person go away, right? I do this and I adjust my thumb. I move my thumb closer, it gets bigger. I move my thumb farther away, it gets smaller. That's exactly what we're experiencing with the moon. So when the moon is further away in its orbit, its shadow is a little bit small. And when it's far enough away in the orbit that it doesn't completely cover the sun, that's why we have an annular eclipse. Okay. And again, the difference between whether or not you get an annular or a total eclipse or the duration of totality depends on all these complex things of the alignment of the Earth, Sun, Moon, the Earth-Moon distance. The Earth-Sun distance is a little less important because the Sun is so big and so far away that we don't tell the difference nearly as well. Okay. But the Moon is so close we can see the difference, and that's why people talk about supermoons. It's when the Earth is closer, the Moon is closer to the Earth from our perspective. Okay? So that's what annularity looks like, and actually that top picture is during the period of annularity at the Albuquerque eclipse. Notice it's kind of funny, you know, it's weird lighting, but it's not dark. Okay. Yeah.
So what causes the changes between the gravitational move and Earth, and the distance between each?
Yeah, the reason why the orbits aren't exactly circular is because as the planets and moons form, and if they get hit by something, the moon is getting hit by debris or comets or something all the time, it will deflect the moon a little bit and knock it slightly out of its prior orbit. So you don't get exactly a circular orbit over years and years and millennia and eons. So that's why it's not circular.
But it seems, you know, with at least, you know, what I was taught in school is that, you know, that gravity is consistent. Gravity is consistent. You can calculate it. You can, you know, mathematically calculate it, and so it should be consistent. And so,
it is consistent, but it's not identical everywhere. And so the gravitational effects, as they're affected, it's consistent to the extent that we can measure it over a short period of time. Okay? We haven't been able to observe all of the impacts. And it's actually very complex math that, sorry, I can't go into right now to explain that the impact of the moon around the Earth is affected by the sun and the other planets in the solar system. So when you add all of those effects up over a long period of time, you get slight variations that become noticeable. Okay? So this was a really cool experience, I will say that. But it's not quite as cool as what we're about to get. But I'm also going to say that I am I'm a little biased. I think we live on the best planet. And I think that we have the best eclipses. And the reason why I say that is because Earth only has just the one moon. I mean, other planets that really aren't as big, aren't as fancy, don't have as much air and water, but they've got more moons. I'm not jealous, okay? Because the Perseverance rover actually got to take pictures of partial solar eclipses on Mars. So these are images. The top one is multiple images of the moon Phobos passing across the sun from the rover's viewpoint. And the bottom two images, those didn't happen exactly the same time, but they're a comparison of Phobos and Deimos. Deimos clearly is a really tiny little wisp of a moon. And even Phobos, it's bigger, but it's not big enough to generate a total eclipse. And it's not the right shape. to completely cover the sun's disk. You know, they've got more moons, but we have definitely better eclipses. Okay, so I could go into lots of details about a lot of things. I wanted to make sure that I left enough time for questions, but I just want to cover one last thing. Again, our experience of totality gives us an appreciation for not just the moon itself, but the moon's features. So when we look at what's called the diamond ring or the Bailey's beads, right at totality, there's this flash of light around the disk of the moon. That is actually the sun shining through mountain ranges on the moon. And it's just enough of the right angle that you get this little spark of light as the disk of the moon covers the disk of the sun, which is just so amazing. And when people are doing these very, very complicated Parker Solar Probe or other scientific experiments, what they're trying to study is the corona of the sun, which you can't really study when the sun's shining right at you because it's so bright. But it's still an open question about why the solar atmosphere, the corona, is measured in millions of degrees and the surface of the sun is only about 10 or 15,000 degrees. We still don't know why. And what's fascinating is that we're building missions now to, actually the Parker Solar Probe was launched in 2018 and it's flying towards the sun right now. It can't orbit the sun because the sun gets too, it would get too hot, okay? But it does flybys. So it's trying to study the corona of the sun. We have images of artists taking hand drawings of the corona of the sun from the Bloomington totality in 1869. We have views of the corona from 16th, 17th century. We believe that that's actually what the artists and scientists of the day were trying to capture. So it is only because of the eclipses that we started to understand many of the dynamics of our own star. So that's why I think that this is such a fascinating thing. I can go into lots more detail, but I want to know what you want me to talk about. And so I will just leave you with a poem. Your face is a gift, close enough to see, touch, dream. Artemis, teach us. That Artemis there used to be the word Selene, the older term for the moon, but I found out that a lot of people couldn't figure out how to pronounce Selene as 3 syllables. It's a haiku, so it has to be 3 syllables. So I figured out, now that we have the Artemis launches coming up, maybe we'll call it Artemis. So, again, lots to talk about, lots more to share with you if you wish, but we'll stop here and take some questions. Thank you. Okay, yes?
Yeah, what happens if on April 8th is overcast like it is today?
Besides the fact that that is one of the things that I'm most worried about and one of the things that I can do the least about, well, what happens at dusk on an overcast day? It still gets dark. So within the path of totality, the difference between started to understand many of the dynamics of our own star. So that's why I think that this is such a fascinating thing. I can go into lots more detail, but I want to know what you want me to talk about. And so I will just leave you with a poem. Your face is a gift, close enough to see, touch, dream. Artemis teaches. That Artemis there used to be the word Selene, the older term for the moon, but I found out that a lot of people couldn't figure out how to pronounce Selene as 3 syllables. It's a haiku, so it has to be 3 syllables. So I figured out, now that we have the Artemis launches coming up, maybe we'll call it Artemis. So, again, lots to talk about, lots more to share with you if you wish, but we'll stop here and take some questions.